Good evening. Namaste, everyone. Welcome back to our fourth session. Uh, I am Satya Pulkuri, your host for this session. I'm a research associate for Indic Researchers Forum. Our fourth session is on security challenges and the role of external state. So, without any further ado, I extend a warm welcome to our session chair, Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, Vishisht Seva Medal, Advisory Council member of Indic Researchers Forum, and former director of Bharat Dynamics Limited. And now, let's welcome our speakers. Major General Shashi Asthana, Sena Medal, Vishisht Seva Medal, and Chief Instructor USI of India. And Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler, Senior Director, Counter-Extremism Project. And our last speaker, Harjit Sandhu, a retired IPS officer, counter-terrorism and law enforcement professional. Brothers, and we all are delighted to have you all. I now request Srivastava sir to continue. I pass on the mic. Over
So,
to you, sir.
yeah, a very good evening to all the audience and the distinguished speakers. Uh, it's a session which is on security challenges and the role of external forces, and we got a very distinguished panel of speakers here. Rise of Taliban and Islamic fundamentalism, coupled with the fall of Kabul, gave rise to new dimensions of security challenges, which happens to be the topic of this session and a very, very important topic. I heard the last session, which was so emotionally charged, that it was really so wonderful to hear the sentiments on Pashtun nationality. Now we come to security challenges, which now emerged because of the Afghanistan, the way it has gone. This singular issue has now become the intrinsic part of all geopolitical discussions amongst developed, not so developed nations. Afghanistan, which is a nation state inhabited by more than 28 plus million people, with 14 major ethnic groups like Pashtuns, we're talking about Tajiks, Hazara, Uzbek, Baluch, Turkmen, Nuristani, Pamiri, Arabs. It's holding a landlocked country of approximately 250,000 square miles. It is very critical to global peace and order. This country is bordered by Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, China, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. While Chinese consider Afghanistan as a graveyard of empires, from British to Russians to Americans, it is still considered the strategic battlefield of interest for all regional nation states, Europe, UK, US, including India. India has made substantial investments in Afghanistan during US-sponsored regimes. Afghanistan has the largest reserve of lithium, so very essential for electric vehicles, the new generation vehicles, alongside mineral deposits estimated to be around 3 trillion US dollars that include rare earths, uranium, gold, oil, copper. Afghanistan is also home, in contrast, and heaven to Islamic fundamentalism that Taliban and its Taliban alive through production and trade of drugs. That way, it's a paddy fields of opium. Presently, Afghanistan is in the hands of Taliban, many of whom are on the wanted list or the sanction list of United Nations. Many experts feel that under the Taliban's rule, the current Taliban 2.0, still, Afghanistan could become a safe haven for terrorists, capable of launching attacks against the United States itself and its allies and world over. Experts feel that this will happen despite Taliban's statements that Afghanistan's soil will not be used against the security of any other country. But the actions on the ground do not really support this. China views Taliban ascendance with cautious welcome and glee. It feels that their early indulgence with Taliban may spur their Belt Road initiative and progress them and give access to mineral and lithium reserves, which they so very badly want, but is very of inspirational impact. The victory of Taliban may have on East Turkestan Islamic movement, that is ETIM, which is fighting for the rights of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province of China. China also sees with glee the decline of US as a superpower and hopes to create dissonance in the minds of Taiwan while filling up that position. They will like to build a narrative of American failure, incompetence, and vulnerability. Russia is too concerned about the flow of refugees, drug trafficking, and spread of radicalization, which may impact its own stability. Iran sees it as a threat and opportunity. Pakistan, of course, has seeded and nurtured Taliban with the help of CIA and sees their victory as its own. Currently, they have been able to influence and set up as per their liking. However, it is expected that this romance may not last long. Taliban would like to free itself from the grips and clutches of Pakistan. So we see that each stakeholder, including India in the geopolitical sphere, is worried about essentially two critical issues. Firstly, Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for terrorist groups, and secondly, Afghanistan becoming safe haven for drug production and supplies. These are very destabilizing forces. And this is where the external forces find convergence and alignment. Each stakeholder, while guarding its own interest, is wary of this because Afghanistan, which is in turmoil and not stable, is a real threat to global peace and order. Expecting Taliban, who have been in wild for decades and the Taliban 1.0 was no good, to govern for peace and order is something of future, which probably one would not like to comment as of now. Experts have their own analytical rationale for each of the interplaying influences on the security challenges and the role of external forces. We have a panel of very distinguished speakers who cover the entire spectrum of issues connected with the topic. External forces, religious fundamentalism, and drug-related terrorism. Before I invite the first speaker, I would like to say a few words about him and introduce him. General Asthana, who's our first speaker, is a globally acknowledged strategic and security analyst. He has authored over 400 publications. He is a veteran infantry general with 40 years of experience at national and varied international fields. He held key appointments in Army and UN, United Nations. He's been instructor, speaker on various forums and organizations, and he's a very well-known face on the television channels on all matters that are related to security and defense analysis. He's here to give his views and thoughts on the topic which we have, that is the role of USA, China, and other regional powers in Afghanistan crisis. May I request you now, General, to start your session with these words. Please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Respected members of Indic Research Forum, organizers, co-panelists, and viewers. It's a topic which is most discussed nowadays, and I recently heard when I was on a television show just before this, the Prime Minister's speech in UN General Assembly. And he in no uncertain terms talked of Afghanistan and also mentioned two things. One, the soil should not be used for terror against any other country. And more importantly, that the turmoil in Afghanistan should not be misused by any other country. Now, that was, I think, a very sound message to a number of neighbors who have been trying to unnecessarily influence the people of Afghanistan and who have their own stakes. Now, everybody has stakes. There is no doubt about it. There are global dimensions to this. There are regional players, there are global players, there are internal players, there are external players. And as the topic has been given to me, I have to talk about the USA, China, and the regional players. And what exactly happened, I will analyze that. What happened, everybody knows. I think the fact that everybody is here would be interested in this particular topic. So I'm sure they all must have chased the news. So what is in the news is already known. Now, what I am going to speak to you is basically the analysis of it. Let me start with United States. United States entered Afghanistan after 9/11. It's not that Taliban regime did not exist before 2001. It did. It was also not there that they were the best of the administrators. They were still having Sharia law and doing all what they are doing now. But what happened was 9/11. Till 9/11, US did not take terrorism seriously. The moment 9/11 happened, obviously they had to do something. And to avenge that, once they found out that it had roots in Al-Qaeda, they wanted the Al-Qaeda leader to be given to them, which did not happen. Taliban regime did not do so. So therefore, they entered with a war aim, and the aim was dislodge Taliban regime, install a democratic regime, and kill Osama bin Laden with no uncertain terms. They entered that, achieved that. Had they gone back at that point of time, it would have been a success story. But there they did the first strategic error, and that was prolonging their stay there. Now, what was the intention? The intention was that they wanted that strategic space to belong to them, and they knew that there are certain other players who want to grab that strategic space. Now, they didn't want that. They were confident that Russia is not going to come back again because they already had met their fate once. But they were certainly apprehensive of China. So they also thought that out of the other terror groups, let's dislodge some of them and weaken some of them. But the second mistake which they did was that a Wahhabi terrorism and Wahhabi ideology is an ideology. It cannot be fought by air warfare and drone warfare. You have to link with people and you have to be in rural areas. You cannot enjoy from bases and keep hitting certain guys with drones and think that you will be able to win it. So with the result, the third strategic error which happened was that Pakistan double gamed them. They joined them to say that, okay, we will fight the global war of terrorism with you. But at the same time, they kept helping Taliban. And when Taliban was dislodged, they gave them shelter. They ensured that their leader remains there. And they also gave shelter to Al-Qaeda. They gave shelter to everybody else. And they also kept supporting these terror groups. At the same time, on the name of global war of terrorism, they took fair amount of financial help from USA, and basically USA was double gamed. They also tried another trick, that when USA wanted them to fight on the western border, that is on the Afghanistan border, they came up to them to say that, okay, we have a problem of India threat. You will have to look after the other border, that is the Indian border. So how can you help us out? And then the US response was, obviously, there is no other response. They said, okay, we'll give you military hardware, because that military hardware, if you recall, cannot be used against anybody other than India. So that military hardware was given, and a very senior diplomat, I will not name him, from USA, he said that their interests elsewhere had to be looked after, so we looked after their interests elsewhere. Now that elsewhere was the Indian border. So that is how they grabbed everything from them, and at the same time they kept helping Taliban. Now Taliban still remained in the rural areas, and thereafter, once they found that the strategy of the USA, and they understood as to how they are managing their operational affairs, they at some point of time, a culmination point was reached and USA was tired and they wanted to get back. Now they had two choices. Either you give it to Abdul Ghani, and they found in their wisdom, Abdul Ghani's government accepted BRI, It also accepted the funds from USA. There were also corruption allegations. So they thought that if this is the case, then it will take no time before we move out or China to be in. The second option was that, okay, talk to Taliban, get your exit strategy right, give arms and training to the Afghan National Forces, let Taliban also deal with them in a manner that you don't buy additional US casualties, because they had reached their culmination point and it was a tired United States at that point of time. And Taliban had started gaining ground from rural areas. Now that is where the Taliban-Pakistan strategy was slightly better than the US strategy. Now, under these circumstances, they thought that if they pull out and they give it to Taliban, they give a chance to Taliban as well as to the Afghan National Forces with fair amount of balance of power, there will be so much of chaos in Afghanistan that nobody will enter this graveyard of empire, as AVM Shrivastava had put it. Now, this is one of the theory of certain strategists of USA. Now, where it went wrong was, they had calculated that within 2 years, it will take about 6 months at least for the Afghan National Security Forces to stand to Taliban-Pakistan nexus. It's not that they didn't know that Pakistan is helping Taliban. They knew it. They knew it all through. Their problem was, which was again the next error, that for the ground logistic route, you cannot maintain American forces without except for Pakistan route, because Iran, they had adversarial relations with Iran. So they had to carry on with Pakistan despite knowing that the Pakistanis are double gaming them. So under these circumstances, what went wrong was that they thought that perhaps the ANSF will continue for 6 years, 6 months, and 6 months is adequate time for them to firstly withdraw the softer elements and then withdraw the harder elements. Now that 6 months, unfortunately, became almost even less than a month. Now that is where their whole calculation went wrong, and it became a botched withdrawal in a manner that they had to pull out the hard elements earlier and the softer elements remained there. Now the whole world faces a hostage situation and a resultant hostage situation in a manner that there are people from other countries, there is a threat to Afghan people, there is a threat of Sharia law, there is a threat of execution, and the problem is, more pressure you put on Taliban, these threats are going to be even more. And if you have to get out your guys, then there is no other way. And even if you have to distribute the minimum essential need for humanitarian crisis, or then also you have to talk to Taliban. So talking to Taliban is becoming inescapable. So this is a hostage situation wherein Taliban with their guns has made the entire population, whether it is the internal population or external population, as a hostage, and the whole world, because of the so-called the terrorist regime, is now hostage to this situation. Now we saw the interim government coming up. Now this is a government of the terrorist, by the terrorist, and for the terrorist. It is not for the people. So in this government, if out of 33 guys announced earlier, 33 ministers, 18 are UN designated terrorists, obviously it's not all that easy to firstly give them recognition anyway. And in any case, they don't deserve one because they have not behaved in the manner in which they were supposed to behave as for the governance model. The second thing is that even when they did the expansion, they have included some other communities to some extent, but certainly no women. Women ministry has been closed. They've got vice and other ministry to discipline women. There have been tremendous amount of restrictions, etc., etc. But notwithstanding that, from the United States angle, the situation is that while they have condemned Xinjiang, they have condemned Burma, Myanmar, they have condemned everybody else, but condemning Taliban, everybody's response is neutral. Even the UNSC resolution which came out is also weak. Initially, under Indian presidentship, we had included Taliban. But then the problem with UNSC is that for a resolution to come out, and since I have done so many tenures in United Nations, I can tell you that no resolution will come out unless all P5 members are on board. Now, China is helping them in any case, which I will cover immediately. So the problem which came up is that this resolution is more of a consensus document, because it is better than no resolution, because it's a resolution. And a resolution at least says that that soil should not be used against the other countries for terrorism, and they must look after that. It should be an inclusive government. At least these 2 points are included. Otherwise, this also would not have been there. So that's why we had to go through this resolution. Now coming on to China. Chinese interest is, one is connectivity, second is exploitation of the mineral resources. Third, and the most important, is they do not want ETIM to trouble them in Xinjiang. ETIM has been supported by Taliban. They have been supported by all the terror groups. They have fought alongside Taliban. And therefore, their relationship with Taliban is quite strong. Their leaders have been strong leaders. And therefore, for China also to assume that Taliban, irrespective of how many promises they make, they will divorce ETIM is not possible. And Chinese know it. They are hoping, and that's why they initially called them. They have got two methods to deal with the Taliban. One is buy out certain leaders, which they are trying, and they have bought a number of them. Two is give them that they are a P5 country, so give them an assurance that I will look after your interest in UNSC. So that also they have done, with the hope that ETIM does not strike against them. So now, as far as Taliban is concerned, my sense is that they will not divorce ETIM, but what they will do is they've already told Chinese that ETIM don't exist in Afghanistan, which is of course I don't believe this statement. The second thing is that they will play ignorance and deniability. Whatever attack ETIM does hereafter, they will say, no, we don't know about it. It's not been done from Afghanistan. So that will be the stance as far as China is concerned. Now, as far as investment of China is concerned, they will be very cautious. They are smarter, having learned from USSR and USA and earlier UK. If you take the entire century, they will be certainly much more smarter, and their strategies are long term. So they are not going to invest so easily, and they will certainly weigh everything and then invest. Now coming on to Pakistan. Now initially, all terror groups of Pakistan and Afghanistan, there are a whole lot of them, they all collaborated because of one religious, so-called misplaced religious faith, that let's get all outsiders out, let's get US out, let's get multinational forces out. And they all collaborated with them because that was a common agenda. But Taliban is not a homogeneous team. And since they are not homogeneous team, the moment US left, the fractions are emerging. And now they will start fighting. There is a power tussle, there is a power game. And now Pakistan is also worried. Today, Taliban wanted to speak in United Nations. They have not been given an opportunity, and rightly so. But their other puppet, so-called, I shouldn't be using that word, but this is exactly what he has done. The Pakistani president had said exactly what Taliban wanted to say. He has gone into the United Nations and said exactly the same thing. Because now he has to balance out with two factors. Earlier, he had to say whatever Pakistani army wanted to say. Now he also has to say what Taliban wants to say. And his PR campaign to the rest of the world is under these two major pressures. Why these major pressures? Because they have been able to get a fencing all right on so-called their perception of strategic depth or Durand line or whatever you may say. But the problem is that TTP is not going to sit down. A strong Taliban with lot of military arsenal left in Afghanistan also means a strong TTP. It also means a strong ISKP. It also means a strong AQIS. And with all these people, there is tremendous amount of trouble which Pakistan is smelling, and it will appear to them much sooner than what they anticipate. Already, I think the killings on the borders have started. The terrorists in Pakistan have become quite active. The number of deaths of the Pakistani security forces is on the rise. And there are, you can see some Taliban flags also in Pakistan. And certain segments have already started saying, certain Maulvis have also started saying as to why you are not having Sharia law. Why can your ladies can do fashion parade and why the Talibani girls should be in burqa. So this Talibanization of Pakistan is another factor which is going to affect them. Now let me come to the other, and I will wind up with the other neighbors. As far as Russia, Central Asian republics are concerned, their worry is the export of terrorism and refugees. Similar worry also exists for Iran, and Iran has an additional worry that the Shia population of Hazaras, they should not be executed, because in Taliban 1.0, they were executed. There were mass executions. But Iran did not back the minorities this time, because again, the common factor was the animosity to US was a common factor. And therefore, this time Iran was silent than what it was earlier. So therefore, but again with a risk, and the risk was of Hazaras. So Iran is also now waiting and seeing that if you would have seen that when the attacks were there in Panjshir and Pakistanis actually helped them out along with all the wherewithals, then Iran did make some statements, but that's about all. They did not do any kinetic help to the Panjshir Valley. So that is the worry of Iran, and they will play out depending upon how Taliban treats minorities and the Shia community. So that's as far as Iran is concerned. Now let's talk about India. Now I've finished the immediate neighbors. As far as India is concerned, a fair amount of propaganda by Pakistan exists that now all these terrorists are going to come there, which they will try, certainly. There are a whole lot of terrorists who will come there. They will also have better weapons and better night vision sights and things like that. But as far as Indian establishment is concerned and our security grids is concerned and our line of control is concerned, let me tell you in no uncertain terms, earlier also, Pakistan did not had a shortage of terrorists. If the infiltration of terrorists has gone down, it is because after Article 370, the political patronage went down. The NIA was active. The synergy between the security forces, intelligence agencies, etc. is very good. And the finances were choked. And that was the reason why it went down. Now, even if you have more guys waiting in the terrorist camps in Pakistan, it doesn't make too much of a difference for us. But what is worrisome for India is the idea of the separatists and the lone wolf warriors all over the world. It's not only the concern of India, that the terrorists can win. And the terrorists, this propaganda that terrorists have been able to beat the strongest military of the world, this propaganda is giving the additional boost for these people to become active. Now that is a dangerous situation in a manner, because it's not only line of control. They can get into India from other areas, whether it is through Nepal or through other countries, and etc. etc. So this is one worry. Now this worry is not only for India, it is for everybody else. Now let me also tell you, 9/11 happened. Before that, US did not believe that terrorism can happen. Now it is for the other countries to again get cautious that it is Afghanistan-Pakistan region is the largest conglomerations of terrorists. A repeat of 9/11 can happen anywhere and much earlier than that. Pentagon's assessment was that for 2 years, none of these groups will become strong enough to strike their mainland. I feel that that assessment may be wrong, and they may become stronger even earlier. So this is where the whole world has to look at it. I think I'll finish here and I'll open to the question answers.
Okay, thank you, General Asthana. It was a very analytical and very great insight into the matter. And as we now can conclude that you were very right in saying that it's a government by the terrorists, for the terrorists, of the terrorists. And it's a global worry. It's not a worry only for India or for US. And I could also understand the conundrum in which, and double gaming which went on by the Pakistan for the US. And the sad narrative is that Pakistan could beat US, at least on this front. I believe that you have to leave at 9 o'clock, or so we reserve your questions for the end of the session.
I cancelled that because Prime Minister Modi's speech is over. So we've already discussed it.
Okay. Okay. So we'll take on your questions little later towards the end of the session. So
Okay.
I have the privilege of now inviting the next speaker. The next speaker is Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's the Senior Director of the Counter Extremism Project in New York and Berlin, co-chair of the Advisory Board of Global Diplomatic Forum in London, a member of the Advisory Board of Justice for Kurds, and a member of Board of Directors of Compliance and Capacity Skills International in New York, as well as a teaching fellow at the Academy for Security in the Economy in Essen. In 2013, he joined ISIL, Daesh, Al-Qaeda Taliban Sanctions Monitoring Team of United Nations. That's great, sir. Security Council, and served as team's coordinator from 15 to 18. Who better than you to work on this session? And having studied in Tübingen and Georgetown in Washington, DC, and Tel Aviv, he holds a master's and PhD degree in international terrorism from St. Andrews University. Doctors, may I invite you to speak on your topic, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and future of global jihad. A very, very interesting and stimulating topic. You may.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So let me just hopefully start my presentation. If you could just let me know if you can see this. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. First of all, to the Indic Research Forum and Yashas for inviting me to present today. I really appreciate this opportunity. As said, I will talk about the Taliban's relationship with various terror groups and do this in 4 stages. First, let's have a look. Where are they in Afghanistan, the terror groups? Then I will specifically look at the Taliban and Al-Qaeda relationship, the Taliban and the Islamic State relationship, and what this affiliate in the Islamic State of the Islamic State in Afghanistan actually means for the greater global network of the Islamic State, and then development threat scenarios that we've been discussing in Europe and with our American friends. By the way, good morning. I'm in New York right now. What is the state of play in Afghanistan? So first of all, you don't need to worry about Afghanistan becoming a safe haven for terrorism. It already is. So if we just look at where the Al-Qaeda groups are, and I've very generously made the circles smaller. I could have just circled it around the country just to give you a bit of an indication. In the north, of course, you have the IMU that was already talked about, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, ETIM, also called the Turkestan Islamic Party. These are the Uyghurs that the Chinese are worried about. And of course, the Islamic Jihad group, IJG, that is an offspin of the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan and responsible for attack planning outside of the region, including in Europe, including in Germany. In the eastern parts of Afghanistan, of course, you have those groups that have been pushed over by the Pakistani military operation the last couple of years, so Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and others, and of course the TTP. And in the south, you have AQIS, the Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. And of course, you have Al-Qaeda core all over the country with the Taliban leadership. Then, of course, you also have the Haqqani network, which I separated out from the Taliban, not only because they're ideologically far more inclined towards Salafist ideas than any other part of the Taliban, and have strong relationships to Gulf individuals and radical reachers in the Gulf, but also because from the very onset, the Haqqani network was the main conduit between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. As you may remember, famously, Mullah Omar wasn't exactly sure what to do with this guy, Osama bin Laden, and it was the Haqqani network who actually convinced him to support and harbor him. And then finally, most recently, you have here the Islamic State in Iraq in the Levant Khorasan province, ISIL-K, that's the official name from the Security Council, which has only a small circle on my map here, but that's only because that is their main operation area, but they have cells and attack capabilities pretty much in all urban areas throughout the country. As you may have heard, I'm sure, not only did they attack Kabul airport on the 26th of August, but pretty much on a regular basis, every couple of days, there have been ISIS-K attacks in Afghanistan. The real risk of ISIS-K, and I'll come to this a little bit later on, is not just that this group is definitely trying to inspire attacks abroad, but also that this is the receiving ground for any disgruntled Taliban, the logical receiving ground for any disgruntled Taliban, that are the losers, in inverted commas, from this regime, also placing a level of the moderation that whatever Taliban 2.0, and I find this a very, very dangerous term, this is Taliban 1.0 is the same individuals doing the same things, the same jobs. The first sentence of Zabiullah Mujahid in the press conference was, "We have not changed ideologically." So their communication strategy in English is better. When you read the original Pashtun Dari, then you realize it really is the Taliban of old. Therefore, even if the Taliban wanted to do a bit more moderate policies on any issue, there is a limit to what they are internally, if they want to keep the movement together, can do, because there's now a receiving opposition group, and that's unfortunately the only opposition group to speak of. Unfortunately, the National Front in the Panjshir Valley is not at the moment a viable armed opposition. This is one. And any Taliban who doesn't like what the Taliban are doing is very likely going there. And I'll explain to why there is a long tradition of the Taliban to do this. Now, let's look at the Taliban Al-Qaeda. It was a symbiotic relationship since the inception. As I said, Mullah Omar had some hesitations with this young Saudi guy, Osama bin Laden, but was quickly convinced by the Haqqani network. And as you know, very famously, they harbored Osama bin Laden even as the cost of their own regime in 2001. Now, what was the important things that Al-Qaeda did deliver to the Taliban pre-2001? And this was a physical camp infrastructure. I'll get to this in a second. Here you can see what's going on right now. This is, I'm sure you've all seen these pictures, Aminul Haq, the former security chief of Osama bin Laden, a couple of weeks ago, returning into Afghanistan, into Nangarhar, where he is originally from. As you can see, he doesn't seem to be very worried that this has become a dangerous place for him. Therefore, the train and assist that Al-Qaeda has done for the Taliban is definitely going to continue. Primarily, Al-Qaeda core, IMU, and IJGT and ETIM did this train and assist in the last couple of years, since 2015. So Azar Baas was mentioned in the previous session a couple of times. It started in 2014, but since 2015, there was a deliberate push of the Pakistani army and security forces, of the groups that they didn't like, into Afghanistan. Some fighters from LET, some fighters from Jaish-e-Mohammed, but in particular, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan were pushed over the border into Afghanistan, and the very famous fence was built in order to prevent them from coming back easily. AQIS is a purpose-built Al-Qaeda affiliate that was a real political reaction of Zawahiri to the establishment of the Islamic State in the same year, in 2014. As you know, it's a break-off of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, in order to counterbalance the propaganda war that was going on at that time against Al-Qaeda from the Islamic State. And it was this AQIS that took over the leadership of the political relationships, if you want to term that, between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda since its inception. So the close coordination that you've heard, and meetings and consultations between Taliban leaders and Al-Qaeda go all throughout the negotiations with the United States, which also tells you how much intention there is for the Taliban to actually control Al-Qaeda in their country in the future, was done by AQIS. So they were the main go-to point. Now let's have a look at the Taliban and ISIS-K. ISIS-K, or ISIL-K, as the Security Council calls it, is a purpose-built affiliate. And this is only one of two on the entire planet where the Islamic State leadership in Iraq and Syria went through the trouble to send delegations to the country. The other example is Libya, in order not to accept the pledge of allegiance from already existing already existing terror groups, but to actually, from the ground up, build a completely new ISIL presence in the country. They arrived in 2014. Then it was a group of 6 Arabs. They traveled around the country from the south to the east to the north, and then back to the east, to network, to talk to power brokers, to map out in the same way that they had mapped out parts of Syria before they established themselves there. Who is the most powerful power broker? Who is the key religious leaders in the region? And then in 2015 announced their existence. And because it was a purpose-built affiliate, until the very last minute, where the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria could finance affiliates abroad, it fully financed ISIL-K in Afghanistan. ISIL-K in Afghanistan had no income flows locally to speak of until about the middle of 2017, where ISIL in Iraq and Syria sent a message to all of its affiliates that there won't be any possibility to sending more money, because there is now a military campaign going on against us in Iraq and Syria. You're on your own, unfortunately, develop your own finances. But until this time, only Libya and Afghanistan were the two affiliates that were financed. Now, the relationship with the Taliban is an interesting one, because, as I said, the guys were in the country networking from 2015. The establishment of ISIL Khorasan was in 2015. But until 2016, there was no visible military resistance of the Taliban against ISIL in Afghanistan. It only started when the Islamic State Khorasan was able to get control of some of the valleys in Nangarhar province and basically implemented its actual anti-drugs ideological opposition. Meaning, for about $3 million, they bought the harvest from the poppy farmers in those valleys, burnt them publicly, and declared anyone growing drugs, producing drugs, or transporting drugs through these valleys will be executed, including with their families. This was the point where the Taliban started to show actual opposition and then cooperated bizarrely with the international forces and with the Kabul government in their fight against ISIL-K. But my interpretation of this, and I was in the country at the time, was really the problem was not that there is ISIL-K and that it's in the operational area of the Haqqani network. All of this, was acceptable. There's a very shady relationship between the Haqqani network and ISIL-K in the last couple of years. It was the interference in the drug trade, this outlet into Pakistan, that the drugs needed to go for the southern and for the northern route. That was really for the southern and for the eastern route. It needed this to go away. That's why the fight started. Why was there no opposition in the first year? Because many of the ISIL-K members were Afghans, but former Taliban, disgruntled because the Taliban were becoming, in their eyes, too moderate, etc., etc. So the first reaction of the Taliban leadership to the establishment of ISIL-K, officially through social media channels, was, do not kill them, they're our brothers, they will come back. We just need to convince them of the right way. Since 2016, of course, there was then opposition to ISIL-K. There was particularly fierce fighting in the north because ISIL-K tried to establish a presence in 2018, just at the time where the Taliban were building up their presence. So it was a rivalry rather than actual enmity. And then, of course, since the handover of the Taliban, this was the big starting point, the Kabul airport attack on the 26th of August. But there have been numerous attacks in Afghanistan by ISIL-K at the moment, because they need to show that they are still there, they're relevant, and they also need these attacks as propaganda material, because on the global scale, and I'll get to this later again, Al-Qaeda all of a sudden is becoming a popular again. It's no longer seen as the old movement that ISIL, among terrorist sympathizers, no longer seen as the old movement and ISIL as the more modern movement where young jihadis should join. Now, Al-Qaeda has won an entire country, done something together with the Taliban that ISIL could not do, and that is to establish an actual physical emirate. Now, as far as the developing threat is concerned, let me first turn to a discussion what I think is a little bit less likely, luckily. So the re-establishment of physical camp infrastructure pre-2001 is just not really likely. This is Khalden camp, one of the big camps, the training camps, just in 2001. And this is how the exact same area looked like a couple of hours later after the Americans took care of it. So these camp infrastructures are very unlikely to re-emerge, but there's also no longer the same rationale for those camps than it was pre-2001. Because what you need to understand, these thousands of fighters that were trained in the camps, the vast majority were not trained as Al-Qaeda operatives to do attacks like the USS Cole and Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, or the attack on LAX, or the attempted attack on LAX in 2000. They were trained as particular foreign fighter contingents for the Taliban fight against the Northern Alliance. Now, there is no Northern Alliance to speak of at the moment in the country. There is not the same threat level that ISIL-K poses than the Northern Alliance, which held last sways, I mean, not the majority of the country, but significant amount of territory in the north of the country, which the Taliban never were able to control. And that was the actual rationale why Mullah Omar was convinced to then harbor Osama bin Laden, was this training infrastructure. So now you don't have this internal opposition anymore. So you don't need Al-Qaeda to train thousands of fighters. And so you don't need to have those camps. But the really bad news is, as far as the terrorism threat is concerned, that really doesn't make any difference, whether you have these physical infrastructures or don't have these physical infrastructures. If you're talking about training of attack cells for attacks outside Afghanistan, including in Europe and the United States, you can do this on the move. Since 2001, there was this mobile training camps narrative that we heard from the Pakistanis while they couldn't find the people, that these training camps move. And I believe that this is true, that you can go from house to house. You don't need to have that physical infrastructure. What is really a high risk at the moment, because there's a lot of chatter about traveling back to Afghanistan, like it was in 2001, among jihadis and terrorist sympathizers all across the globe, including in Southeast Asia, where it really is difficult to get there. And my big worry is the combination of the Haqqani network being in charge of the passport office in the Interior Ministry right now in Afghanistan, and the Haqqani network being the main conduit, and the Taliban being very unlikely to prohibit entry of individuals from abroad, from any country, that say, I just want to have a Muslim life in the only emirate that exists in the world. Of course, they're not going to deny entry. And then if the Haqqani network is in charge of the passport, you can now get, in the future, biometrically secured, perfectly original Afghan passports under any name that you choose or that your terrorist handler wants you to have. This is a big problem because it does outmaneuver our biometric control systems that we so successfully installed in around the world because of the foreign fighters that were traveling to Syria and Iraq. Now, last slide. What I think is the immediate threat is the rising danger of directed attacks. Now, we've talked about the most complex attack scenario here. People traveling to Afghanistan, getting trained going back to wherever they want to have their attack and conducting something spectacular like Cole, like the Bali bombing, like 9/11. This is a possible scenario, but the far more immediate scenario is directed attacks. And here you can see a picture of the attack in Berlin-Breitscheidplatz in 2015. This wasn't a directed attack, meaning the guy was already in Germany. He didn't have terrorist training when he was in Germany, but he had direct contact to the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and they instructed him on what to do to conduct this attack, whose investigation only concluded a couple of weeks ago in Germany, from 2015 to 2001, because it was one of the largest terror attacks ever on German soil. This can happen all the time now. The Al-Qaeda alleged victory, together with the Taliban, over the international community, is of course a massive inspiration and radicalization. The communication channels are there from Afghanistan into Europe and the US and other countries, and therefore you have this diffuse threat structure that arose through the growth of social media and communication infrastructure, where you don't really know individuals belong to ISIL, Al-Qaeda, or other groups. They're just generally terrorism sympathizers and are open for inspiration, direction, and support from anyone who wants them to conduct an attack. Now, this is definitely going to be something that we will have to watch very, very closely. ISIL-K, as I said, will grow in Afghanistan. It will welcome disgruntled Taliban. ISIL-K has already attempted several times to direct attacks in Europe, including my country in Germany. For example, at the moment, currently at Düsseldorf court, there is a group of Tajiks standing trial that were preparing multiple attacks on US military installations in Germany and were directed by ISIL-K from Afghanistan in 2019, long before the takeover of the Taliban. And the current situation will make this even more likely. Okay, this is all I wanted to say in my opening statement, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schindler. It was a very insightful, very precise analysis of all the terrorist groups that are operating in Afghanistan and are likely to operate. We noted with great concern the participation and the role of Haqqani network in the architecture, government architecture of Afghanistan, present Afghanistan, and the way they can pass on, train somebody and pass on to any country in the world, because they hold the passport giving authority with them, is really something which is a very, very big concern for all the countries. And of course, we know ISIL will grow, as you have brought out, is going to grow. So there is some warning signs for all the countries around the globe, not only Europe or US or allies. There are other, like India, are concerned about it and will have to at least devise methods and mechanisms to take care of this. And thank you very much. Your questions will come later after the topic, which is with Mr. Harjeet Sandhu, a very eminent speaker and a retired Indian police officer with 40 years of standing. And as I read this thing is something like a national, international, and all kinds of terrorism, financial frauds, everything all included. So I'll read out some. It's very important for the audience to know that he has held very high-level positions in field of law enforcement, counterterrorism, war crimes, homicide investigations, including political assassinations, investigations of financial crimes, as well as financing of terrorism and organized crime, including arms trafficking network. So it reads like as if you're going to watch something Netflix flick on this thing. You seem like a James Bond. Anyway, at international level, he had assignments with Interpol. That's great. UN Security Council, UN International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and United Nations World Food Program. We had investigation into national crime, drafting and editing reports, preparing policy guidelines, capacity building, and liaison with other international organizations. Very well. It's great to have a speaker like you. And a coordinator and spokesperson for 5 panels of experts for UN Security Council in pursuance of resolutions. I'll not number them because they are numbered for the most of this thing, relating to Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Somalia. Very troubled places on the globe. I steered terms of teams of international experts monitoring cases of UN sanctions and global arms traffic networks. This is what we need to know from you. And of course, independent expert to UN Counter-Terrorism Committee, UN Office on Drugs and Crime, report prepared by Harjit Sandhu, that is called Harjit Report, jointly with US agency FinCEN on Hawala and money laundering. You've not left any field untouched. In 2000, has been used by law enforcement agencies as well as courts all over the world. Congratulations for all that. Anyway, now we have him here to deliver a very, very, very important part of this security challenge, which is the threats of narcotics, terrorism, and money laundering. All three included. Who better than you to talk about it in Afghanistan? Over to you, Mr. Sandhu. Floor is open to you.
Thank you so much, Air Vice Marshal Srivastava. It's too much introduction. I am used to just 2 sentences that 40 years experience in law enforcement. We are towards the end of the session, and I think some of us who have been sitting in the previous sessions must be fairly tired. And I had to, at a short notice, chair one of the previous sessions on Afghan perspective. That quickly I had to regroup, and I was coming from running, and when Yashas called me, I quickly took shower and tried to reorganize my thoughts, so got no time to put into this. But I'm so lucky to have other distinguished panel members with me who have already covered, especially Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler, good old friend from the Security Council days. And you can't have a better authority on ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban other than him. So he has already covered, and covering his area, he ventured into my subject also, this one, what I was to speak today. Because on narcotics and money laundering, I used to speak long time back. So afterwards moved more into the terrorism side, bit of financing of terrorism and the real terrorism once we were investigating war crimes and Lebanon Prime Minister's assassination. So I'm trying to get into my old groove a little bit, but already Hans-Jakob already touched on that, and Major General Asthana, of course, summed up quite well of that, which I would have loved to speak on some of those connections, me and Hans-Jakob both, but I will see what we can do. So since we are holding this in India, I will start with it has been a lot in the news. Please forgive I don't have decorated pieces behind me because I traveled from my home to Rome, came back for something. So it is a bland wall, so what you are seeing. So recently it has been a lot in the news about Mundra port seizure 3,000 tons of heroin, which moved from what they call it, Bandar Abbas port in Iran. So there have been a lot of theories. I don't know. I don't venture into guessing what could be the reason, because DRI and NCB, my old colleagues, or like much younger colleagues from those agencies are now working on that. So definitely they will find it. But one of those, what is in the open source, that probably some group from Afghanistan wanted to get rid of what they have. Because there is not only one group, there is not one Taliban. I have traveled, I went a few times during, like when there was so-called national government in Afghanistan. I went from 2012 to 2018, I went 3 times, various places, Kabul, Kandahar, Mazar-e-Sharif. You say there is a national government supported by international community, but when you are on the ground, when I landed in Kandahar, I was told from airport to UN office, on the side, and don't stop on the way on the roadside. This is almost like Iraq. When I was in Iraq, same thing. So situation has not changed. So what it was, whether before Taliban or after Taliban, I will go through that few of the statistics, because that makes better sense to understand where we are heading. When I joined I was in CBI SP narcotics for 2 years, 93, 94. but the very first thing you learn is that the main heroin supply comes from two parts, Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle. The Golden Triangle was Thailand, Burma, Laos. Now people call it Myanmar. But the more important was Golden Crescent, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran. And this region used to produce major heroin supply. And unfortunately, the acetic anhydride, which is required to make it into heroin from opium, is smuggled from India to Pakistan and then onwards to Afghanistan. So if we want to stop, I will come to that if we really need to, that is where it can be cut down. So going from that, even before Taliban, few of the figures I tried to collect, I think somebody was saying lessons of history. So I will, before going into, I will say, if lessons of history teach us anything, it is that nobody learns lessons that history teaches us. It's not my quotation, but I memorize it. It is in one of my memory quotations. I don't know who said it. I don't know the author of that. So we never learn anything from history. And I think it was Major General Asthana who said that in the US, they never thought that terrorism is a problem till 9/11 happened. I happened to be there that time. And way back in 1998 from Interpol, I made a presentation in that famous Ronald Reagan Center, where I was speaking on the misuse of Hawala alternative remittance system in financing crime, including terrorism. Nobody bothered. You know, it was like people said, oh, excellent presentation. There were so many good slides, this, that. But that is all. When 9/11 happened, then they took out old records and then immediately they contacted me wherever you are and all that. So then by 9/11 commission. So this is what is the problem. People think it is not my problem. This has been discussed previously. I'm coming to my topic, but just wanted to, so that I don't forget this point, which was mentioned by General Asthana. So they think it is not their problem. No, if any country which is supporting Taliban, they will see that after a few years or even few months, as Hans-Jakob said, it has already started. So there is no reason that when it will be, it is already there. So this is what they will get, because when Soviet withdrew from Afghanistan, there was a conference by the Islamic groups in New York where they said we have defeated one superpower, but the second superpower where we are sitting here has to be defeated. Nobody took notice of that. It is some madman, but how true it has come. Now coming to how much money we have spent on fighting war on drugs. I'm leaving terrorism for other experts. Now, where Taliban has been getting all the money from that, they have moved from insurgency to now seat of power. If we see, there was a recent statement by Special Inspector General of Afghanistan Reconstruction, John Sopko. I know I received that report in my previous, I used to get the reports before my retirement from UN, but this report I refer to, he said 80% of budget for Afghanistan was financed by US. Now US Treasury has frozen billions of dollars, like 9 billion figure was there. Despite this, it has not affected Taliban. Taliban is well funded based on drugs, extortion, timber trafficking, kidnapping schemes. And then there is more than one Taliban. USA spent more than $8 billion over last 15 years on efforts to deprive Taliban of their profits from opium and heroin trade. From poppy eradication to airstrikes and raids on suspected labs. If despite doing this, the Taliban was financed, then what will happen now when they are also in power? When they also have the Afghanistan National Bank under their control, when previously they were trying to get out of the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, gray list. Pakistan is still on the gray list. But in 2014, Afghanistan was removed from that gray list. I will come to more details on that when I come to money laundering part. So, and another thing, UN Security Council was briefed by the Executive Director of UN Office on Drugs and Crime as recently as this year on 22nd June this year. And he said where Taliban has been collecting, that time, mind you, Taliban was not in control in the country officially. They were not in Kabul or officially in control of other places. It reads, taxes on opium paid by poppy farmers, mostly to Taliban, were valued at $14.5 million in 2019. And taxes on more lucrative manufacturing of heroin generated 8 times higher revenue for them. And in 2020, area under poppy cultivation increased tremendously. And then the opium production, it says, was producing 11% of the Afghanistan GDP, all from the drugs. Add to that other activities, other criminal activities. Then opium poppy cultivation area in 2020, after increase of 37%, it went to 224,000 hectares. So it's a massive area despite crop destructions. And it produced something like 6,300 tons of heroin, which is 85% of the world production. So 85 to 90% they have been debating, that, but at least 80% definitely it is. And they did try to train counter-narcotics police, and they also established first anti-drug canine unit. But that unit was to start this year in November 2021. Now with the Taliban in power, will that unit start? And with that, all the army and police just giving them a walkover virtually. In the previous session, that issue was discussed. I won't go into that. So now with these people, that means all those efforts which UNODC was trying to put it in this year, they will be absolutely washed down the drain. They have, okay, before I go to money laundering, they have suggested few things, UNODC, that is very good in his same speech, he said, because he said addressing regional and global dimensions are essential to stop and disrupt, one, the flow of precursors to Afghanistan. As I said, without acetic anhydride, you cannot make heroin, because heroin is diacetyl morphine. So basically with opium, when they do, even some farmers, they can do crude way of that, becomes a little brownish color. And when it is more purified, during my CBI days in narcotics, we raided few of those laboratories in Bhavani, Mandi, and in MP and Rajasthan, some of those areas. So now UNODC says we have to stop or disrupt the flow of precursors to the Afghanistan, and then stop flow of opiates out of Afghanistan. So if we can stop them going out of Afghanistan, we are stopping at our borders. Like this Mundra port, it has been successful. In a way, it is stopping that. That is what the step it is doing. And then we need law enforcement and judicial cooperation. I have seen that cooperation, how it happens, because I was in Interpol for 4 years. And a lot of countries which do not talk to each other, but through Interpol, they were like talking, and we were able to assist them. And even if you see arms trafficking, I investigated few, just sorry for diversion, few seconds. For UN Security Council, investigated arms trafficking networks. How can arms go from one country to another in aeroplane where aeroplane lands? You have to get end user certificate, you have to get a landing permission, flying over permission, how that is managed. So customs office role is also very important when it comes to that. Now the second part comes on money laundering. Traditionally, Taliban has always operated outside the banking channels. Hawala, when the Americans and some of the other Western world did not know what Hawala is, a very famous case, Choraria case in USA. The person, I'm sorry, I'm just remembering from my memory. So I do not remember which year with the citation of the case. Churaria, when he said that I was moving money through Hawala, the judge asked him in US, what is Hawala? And he explained the Hawala to the court in USA. So that is why when I joined Interpol, my first assignment was to produce some documentation on Hawala because people were surprised what Hawala is. And in Afghanistan, even the central bank in some of the areas where there is no bank branch, they use a local Hawala operator to effect their own transactions. So with this, and now with Afghanistan having Taliban in control, so all the steps which Afghanistan central bank took, where because of FATF they established, because three conditions were there put by FATF to every country. If you want to get out of grey list, if you do not get and you do not do anything, of course, you can gravitate towards blacklist. There are only two countries, North Korea and Iran. But grey list has it keeps on changing. Some countries from Caribbean. I used to be attending these sessions of FATF from Interpol as in charge of money laundering branch. So we used to listen to their nonsense that we are doing this, that, so that FATF countries can decide to get them out. Pakistan could not succeed because they could not convince till today that to get out of the grey list. But Afghanistan in 2014 managed because three conditions were criminalize money laundering. So they enacted an act which now under Sharia law will become redundant. Because if you put Sharia law, then your own legal provisions are redundant. Second, establish a system to trace terrorist money. Whether you trace or not is a different thing, but you have to have a system. And the third was track the cash flow going back and forth across the country's porous border. But Taliban has historically used money mules, physically carrying money from one place to another. And the best currency they use is US dollars. So there is no problem for them. Then they also established another FinTraka, which was Afghanistan's Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center. It was established in 2006. So that will also become redundant. So obviously now with this current situation, all these, what Central Bank of Afghanistan can do, because they have to establish know your customer, which my friend Hans-Jakob said they are issuing new passports. So where is your KYC will be of no value. Then keeping suspicious transaction will be of no value. I can go on and on, but I think to leave some time for the questions, I will hand it over back to you, Chair Sir, Air Vice Marshal Srivastava. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight into what really is happening on the ground. It was very revealing for all of us. And thanks a lot, your experience and your personal knowledge, how things have really mattered to keep the session very alive and going at this late hour. And now I open the session for the audience to come on the questions. I have some questions in the chat box. So I'll just take on the questions, start from Jerry Leas. Your question is addressed to whom? If you're there, you're on the listening port. The question is, many countries around Afghanistan were previously under Soviet Union, and most of them were Islamic. Do you think they will support Taliban? Do you think Afghanistan will become a global jihadi terrorism? I think this question, may I request General Asthana to take it up?
Afghanistan will become, in fact, I will add Pakistan also to that. Pakistan, Afghanistan, that is AFPAC region will become a conglomeration of all the terror groups. And out here, I will also like to add, although Dr. Hans was mentioning, but I would say those training camps are also necessary for Pakistan, because Pakistanis are under FATF pressure, and these guys are wanting some training camps to continue there. They want to shift some guys. They have already shifted a lot. There are UN reports to that effect. There are reports of the Afghanis to that effect. And they want that to continue there so that they can save the ire of FATF, yet continue their so-called strategic assets with them. That's one part of it. The second part of the question, in fact, I just what was the second part of the question?
Do you think Afghanistan will become a global jihadi terrorism center? I think that's what
Yes,
we have.
it is already, as somebody mentioned, and it is going to become more, for the simple reason because there are few requirements for any place to become a terrorist hub. One is that there should be disgruntled population, which is there. There should be people who should be suffering under atrocities, which is already there. Then that particular segment should have some leadership. They have leadership. It may be hidden left, right, or center, but it will be there. Similarly, those smaller insurgent actions will slowly lead to building their strength. You will find in Panjshir, some of the smaller actions will be there. Although Taliban is in control of Panjshir, this is absolutely fine, but they'll keep getting hit. And as far as Taliban are concerned, they are being killed. It's not that they're not facing opposition. They are. And so this situation will also continue. So as far as the future is concerned, I see Afghanistan in a manner that there will be different areas under control of different groups. All groups Taliban will not be able to control. They never were, even in 2001. And there will be various segments and various tribes governing certain areas. And as very rightly the map was shown by Dr. Hans, that there are various areas being controlled by various terror groups. Now, there may be a little bit of shifting, but then those areas traditionally will remain the same. Like Haqqanis will be very close to Pakistan, and so will be certain other groups. So that, I think that will be that is what I see, unless we do something drastically against Taliban in a manner that they are not given access to their money, and all the help, humanitarian help which we want to give, is given in kind through United Nations, and they are made to behave. I don't see that there is any other future because as of now the response is muted, because again it's a hostage kind of situation, as I mentioned earlier.
So General Asthana, there is another question for you, which partly I think you have covered in your answer to the previous question. Is by Satya Pulukari. How is India balancing strategic and traditional allies for this crisis? The first part of the question. And second part of the question is, can India expand its influence on the situation?
See, India is balancing the strategic allies, the earlier ones as well as the new ones. We have got good relations with Russia. We continue to have good relations with the new players. We have got now very good relations with the Americans as well, and we have not given up the good relations with Russians. So India has done a strategic balancing, and the strength of India is that we were never seen in any camp, even earlier. Our traditions are so deeply rooted that we used to be heading the third world. Subsequently, we have good relations, and the beauty is that in the entire Middle East region, in the entire, you will find that we have got good relations with everybody, including Afghanistan.
How about expanding the influence?
Now,
expanding the influence?
I'm coming to that. Now, the problem is that we have, although technically speaking, our border is with Afghanistan, because Gilgit-Baltistan rightfully and legally belongs to us. But on ground, as of now, it is in occupation of Pakistan. So our leverages are limited. And because of the limited leverages, we are suffering an handicap that we have to work through various other, shall we say, friends, whether it is Russia, or it is Iran, or it is Qatar. All of them are our friends. But we have to work through them because we have no choice since we don't have a direct border. So capability to influence directly is limited. Now, as far as Afghan situation is concerned, whatever we can do diplomatically, we are doing. Whatever we can do financially, that will be seen depending upon how Taliban behaves. And I think the whole world is on wait and watch mode. Although I've recently written an article to say as to what is beyond wait and watch, because certain messages must go to Taliban in no uncertain terms. They can't have a hostage kind of situation till times memorial. That will be a blot in the international community, if we can lump that. Because how can you have UN designated terrorist signing your passports, and tomorrow you can have another Haqqani sitting in United Nations headquarters? It will be a shame on UN on the other day. So therefore, I mean, let's be practical about it, and let's not be in a hurry to recognize Taliban, thinking that okay, people are dying. So that I think we will have to balance it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So there's now the question for Dr. Hans Schindler. There are two questions for you, sir. So, or three rather. So I'll start with the first one. Some reports say
I think they're all the
plans-
same, actually.
So the actual, sorry for the,
It's been reposted.
yes, sir. There was some technical
I'll read them
problem.
out. I'll read them out and you can give one comprehensive answer. Some reports say China plans to re-establish the old Silk Route with the help of Taliban. If the Silk Route comes back into existence, it can enhance China's trade with other countries, especially Europe. Such a condition would lead to two problems. Now, he's broken his question here, and then I go further down. The second question is, the question ends there. Some reports say China plans to, I think this is the whole thing, question repeated.
Sir, there was some technical problem. The latest one you can see over there, last one.
Last one. Okay,
Yeah,
two
at
problems.
8:54 p.m. You can see the
Okay.
question.
Okay, two problems. The two problems are defined here.
Sorry
Because
for the
I'll read the
disturbance.
last
There was
question,
some-
the corrected question. Some reports say China plans to re-establish the old Silk Route with the help of Taliban. If the Silk Route comes back into existence, it can enhance China's trade with other countries, especially Europe. Such a condition could lead to two problems. Number one, China could become the largest player in international trade. This may make it easier for China to impose unreasonable sanctions and tariffs on countries that do not cooperate with them. That's the first problem. And second is the Silk Route gives China the easiest access to Europe. This may lead to China threatening European national security. Your response, sir.
Thank you so much. And I really thank you for the question. And I really do want to say that I can absolutely concur with everything my two other esteemed panelists have said, especially about the nature of the Taliban. And thank you, Santu, for pointing out that there's another way to look at the Taliban, not just as insurgents or terrorists. They're also the biggest drug cartel on the planet, frankly speaking. Now, to this question, there is, of course, a strategic shift in the region, which is unfortunately partly of our making. On the one hand, you have Iran, which used to be the marketplace for European goods and European companies until a couple of years ago. And with these sanctions because of the nuclear dossier, it is now seeing a massive increase in Chinese influence. And you have a building all-weather, as the Chinese always saying, relationship already with Pakistan. So what really misses in the middle is Afghanistan. Of course, this is a worry. Of course, everyone in Europe sees that the Chinese government is a little bit ambivalent on what they want to do with the Taliban, to put this diplomatic. However, when you think about the actual implementation of what it means to have the Silk Road in Afghanistan, things don't look just quite as likely. Now, let me just go through Major General Asthana already alluded to this, that the Chinese are smarter than doing this, because there are massive problems. Number one, if this is to work, you would have massive mining and extraction operations in Afghanistan by the Chinese government. And they got the concessions from both the Karzai and the Ghani government in the years back for pretty much anything that is on the ground in Afghanistan. However, no infrastructure to extract on any large scale, and even more crucially, no transport infrastructure. Reason being the Taliban, who prevented exactly this from being established in the last 20 years. So, first of all, before you can do anything that even looks like a Silk Road, you're looking at a decade at best of solid investment in building roads, in building railroads. There is no railroad in Afghanistan, so any large-scale mining operation can't even get their stuff out of the country, right? So that's the first problem. Second problem is myriad of technical problems. My most favorite example always is the copper deposits in Mezainak, the biggest copper deposits in the world, one of the biggest in the world. This is all wonderful, and there's already was until a couple of weeks ago a small Chinese immediate operation there that tried to set up some extraction infrastructure. The main problem here is you need water to extract the copper. And there is a river, it's called the Bamyan River, but if you wanted to extract copper at any scale in Bamyan, in Mezainak, you would have to give the people of Bamyan province the choice of either having copper extraction or drinking water. So unless the population of Bamyan is the only part of the world's population that can live without water, you got a massive technical problem on your hands. The third one is commercial competitiveness. So now let's assume that the Chinese bite the nail, they invest 10 years in establishing infrastructure, they somehow solve all the technical problems. For lithium, it's similar. For rare earth, it's similar technical problems. Let's assume all of this was very well, which is very unlikely to do. You still have to be competing on the world market, which means your resources are only going to go in two directions, because Afghanistan is a landlocked country. Either to Chabahar, so good luck with American sanctions if you do that, or to Pakistani harbors, which means you have to go through the tribal area, which means you have to have additional security precautions for your things that copper miners in Africa don't. So you are absolutely unlikely to even achieve any profit. If you bite the nail and you have a very long strategic patience, you're still not going to make any money out of extraction. These resources have been in the ground for thousands of years. It's known that they're there since the 19th century. So far, no one has managed to extract this. It is rather incomprehensible to me why, now that the Taliban are in charge at this point in Afghanistan, somehow all of these problems that existed the entire time and was one of the reasons why nothing happened, all of them are going to go away just because the Chinese are slightly nicer to the Taliban than they're supposed to be at this moment. So I don't think there is reason for immediate panic as far as this Belt and Road initiative is concerned. However, there is one situation which I would suggest to really monitor closely. Now, as you all know, this is an Indian organization. Pakistan interests in Afghanistan is not a stable government. Now, they significantly like better that the Taliban are in charge than President Ghani was. However, they still need a minimum level of insecurity in Afghanistan as their strategic debt. If you guys start walking, Pakistan is done. Therefore, they need the strategic debt and they need the immediacy of the ability to do whatever they want in Kabul or anywhere else in Afghanistan. This is not a guaranteed if there is a stable government, even if the Taliban, who they supported so long, is the stable government. How loyal the Taliban is, just look at the statement of Zabihullah Mujahid a couple of days after the takeover of Kabul, where he said China is our most important ally. I'm sure more than one official in Islamabad was falling off the chair when that came out, right? So there needs to be instability. China, on the other hand, needs stability in Afghanistan for this Belt and Road initiative to ever work. So now it's really going to be interesting how the all-weather relationship between China and Pakistan, now that their interest is diametrically opposed on this issue, is going to develop now that the weather is going to get slightly stormy. And if we see a repeat of what Pakistan already did, very close to the invasion in Afghanistan in 2001, and that's because it was so close to that, it wasn't really becoming very obvious. Pakistan's support for the Taliban dropped significantly just before the invasion because the Taliban were in control of most of Afghanistan. And that, again, is not the Pakistani interest. It doesn't matter whether it's the old boys, as one of the Pakistani officials said, our boys are in charge or not our boys are in charge. Stability is the problem here, right? And whether we can now see a reverse. What I would like to point out is that there were very triumphant statements in Islamabad right after the takeover of Kabul. Now the statements are already becoming a little bit more nuanced as far as their relationship to the Taliban is concerned. So you can see this playing out. And so the Beijing-Islamabad relationship, and as you know, Pakistan is now part of the Belt and Road, is going to be one really interesting one to watch. All right, thank you.
Dr. Hans, absolutely brilliant. This was really brilliant piece. It gave answer to the fullest. Now there's a question for Mr. Harjeet Sandhu, a veteran police officer. With China's position in international trade and Taliban's aim to promote narcotic terrorism, one of the biggest problems the world could face tomorrow is the free trade of drugs, arms, and terrorist ideals. What do you think are some policies and measures countries should take to spearhead the fight against this? You have covered a little bit in your talk already, but I think you need to bring it out a little more with clarity.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Air Marshal Srivastava. It's very good. And in fact, Hans-Jakob Schindler, he has already responded. You very rightly said. When he was speaking, I had read this question and I thought, oh, okay, good. He has already covered it. So he has already covered it, but I will start on that. Who has more leverage? That in response to this question. Do the international community has more leverage on China and Taliban, or do they have more leverage on the rest of the world? Because this question also says what we can do as a whole international community. And Chair, sir, you started with that the reserves of 3 trillion, I think it was, 3 trillion. Yeah, copper, gold, iron, and lithium.
Yeah.
And Dr. Schindler said they have been there since ages. Yes, they have been. They have been, but still, this gives leverage to China to show it as a carrot to a lot of the international multinational companies to venture into that, and it will provide them opportunity to move the drugs or the weapons. The way this Third World Relief Agency carried weapons to Bosnia in the name of humanitarian supply, Dr. Schindler knows that because we both have followed that. So it will not stop using that leverage and then using that leverage to rest of all of us that yes, Taliban can have access to these $3 trillion worth of resources, whether they actually happen or not. So definitely they will cooperate or not. Then second carrot Taliban can use here is that they will say, okay, you give us this free way, let our things go unchecked, and in return, we promise you, which they have previously gone back all the time, we promise you a lot of human rights, plus we promise you we will not support Al-Qaeda, ISIL, and other such units. So international community will slightly go down. You see, okay, we can, you know, your ports, this, you can use this, and with China, and the moment you go to Security Council, with any resolution, if China does not agree, they will veto it. When India wanted, we tried a lot to get this Maulana Masood Azhar, who was released from prison there in Kashmir. They never agreed. So many other names, they never agreed because every time they will veto it. If you look at the history of the UN Security Council, the maximum resolutions which China has not supported, either by abstaining, they hold this dubious distinction of being one country who has always abstained because they don't want to show their true colors, whether we agree or not. Where it doesn't affect them, they simply abstain. And where it affects them, like Pakistan, they will veto against. So starting with this leverage part, who has more, then I come to this the question, the remaining part, which has not been covered, that how we stop this drugs and arms and money going through China. Because once they have our biggest international communities, especially this Egmont group and other FATFs, target should be to have check on the Afghan National Bank any transactions going through that, because they will have legitimacy. So physical currency can be stopped at other countries' border. They will not let it, because mostly that is the number one priority for Taliban. They physically carry cash. So at least other countries can try to stop, but if they carry to China, China will not stop it. They will go and deposit like Third World Relief Agency. Those two persons went with $5.5 million in Bank of Vienna, and they physically deposited. So nothing will stop that. That is a big risk. But we have to target it at all the three stages. Drug production, because the money comes from there. Then money laundering, because once it gets into money laundering, has to have all the three stages. First, getting into the system, placement. Then starts the layers. And only then the final integration in the global economy. Once that happens, definitely the risk is very high, but we have to see, the international community has to see all the three. And since maximum money is moved through Hawala, Hawala has to be regulated. I wrote in 98 one article in Sydney, the Morning Sydney, some paper, Hawala, a good old vehicle for bad people. So those bad people, they use it, but it is a good old vehicle. It was, sorry, I found on the side, the exact title is Hawala, a good old vehicle for the movement of bad money. It was published in Laundering News of Sydney, 1998. I can send that. So basically, that has to be regulated. The whole global network they started having, there was Abu Dhabi Declaration. In Abu Dhabi Declaration, there was system that Hawala has to be regulated. So they have, once we know, if any Hawala operator is moving money from Afghanistan to India, any city, we can have excessive monitoring of that on those Hawala operators. They have to keep record. Same thing, if anything comes from China, we have to have. Because bank is only central bank, they move it. So bank and Hawala, if we really can, is very difficult. It's not easy. I know. I have gone to Myanmar as an undercover operation and demolished one big Hawala racket way back in 1986. As an undercover agent, I went there. So, but that one is very difficult to get into that. So we have to have a all-pervasive approach. Not only one. The banks have to be on that, taken on that, but the risk is definitely very high, especially the way China is so actually enthusiastic to show there. 1 week before this taking over of Kabul, they were in China, and they also were the same people were also in Islamabad. So they were in both. The whole world knows. It is see. So definitely China will not cooperate with the rest of the world on this. So rest of the world has to find some ways how to counter anything coming from that, so that at least fresh air import is not allowed. This is a very old and famous money laundering method of under-invoicing and over-invoicing, which side of money is to be moved. Long time back in Bombay airport, there were a lot of rotten books imported from a European country. Nobody picked up. Those were lying for 10 years at the Bombay port because the money was already moved. So depending on which side the money is to be moved, so I think all the agencies together have to work on that. Of course, our armed forces, they are doing at the border. And the borders, the physical smuggling happens through the borders, not only through custom post. If you go to Manipur in More, the BSF is guarding it, and people are going freely through that, just by finding a friendly guy on the border post at that time. So we have to have I'm not saying against any BSF, DG is a good friend of mine, but just saying that all these borders, those who are manning, they have to stop the physical currency. Thank you very much. I hope I have covered, because this was already responded to. Yeah. In fact, 90% of the question was covered by the Dr. Schindler already, so I tried to put in something extra. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanu. It was a very precise and experienced answer, I must say. And what remains for me to do is to close the session. And we are way past, but we are so intellectually absorbing that we really remain hooked. And I'm thankful to the audience who have remained, hooked to the grid, despite this being so late in the evening. Thank you very much to the speakers, very, very eminent, very prominently brought out all the issues. General Asthana, Dr. Schindler, and Mr. Sandhu. Thanks a lot. I close the session here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this session, the conference has come to an end. I'd like to express my gratitude to all our speakers and session chairs for their insights, and we especially thank Harjit, sir. The second session chair had to pull out due to some reasons, and sir agreed to chair the session at last moment. And we are very grateful to have you, sir. And it was like you were like at last moment you saved us. And I would also like to thank our audience for their cooperation and patience. And at last, to get our latest updates on our podcasts and conferences, please follow us on social media. The links of the social media handles are shared in the chat box. Thank you once again and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Satya.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It was
you.
an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.